Welcome to The Explainer. We're jumping right into what is literally one of the most influential narratives in human history, the life of Jesus of Nazareth. Today we're going to trace this epic biographical journey step by step, drawing our timeline straight from the ancient source text to see exactly how these foundational documents lay out his story. Let's get right into it.
Now, according to the narrative, the story doesn't actually start at his birth. It begins centuries earlier. The texts tell us that generations of Israelites were hanging on to the words of ancient prophets, like Isaiah, who predicted a coming Messiah, a savior who would redeem humanity. It's this prophecy that really sets the central premise for the whole arc, the arrival of a divine king, but in a completely unexpected way.
So that brings us to his actual arrival. And man, the texts describe a wild series of events. It kicks off with the angel Gabriel appearing to a young woman named Mary, dropping the bombshell that she's going to bear the Son of God. Then, thanks to a Roman census, she and Joseph have to trek to Bethlehem, where Jesus is born in a manger. And it doesn't get easier. Shortly after, they literally have to flee to Egypt as refugees to escape a paranoid King Herod. Fast forward a bit, and the narrative hits us with this incredible scene. Jesus, at just 12 years old, sitting in the Jerusalem temple, totally blowing the minds of seasoned scholars with his wisdom.
All right, jumping ahead to his adulthood. His public ministry officially launches with a baptism in the Jordan River by John the Baptist. But it's immediately followed by a brutal test. The texts say he's driven into the absolute isolation of the wilderness for 40 days of fasting. I mean, imagine that. During this intensely vulnerable time, the narrative claims he was directly tempted by the devil. It's presented as this massive test of his resolve, before his public work even gets off the ground.
When he finally emerges from the wilderness, he doesn't go at it alone. He actively recruits a core team of 12 disciples. But here's the thing, the sources really hammer home. This was an incredibly unlikely crew. We're not talking about wealthy elites or highly educated religious scholars here. No, he chose ordinary fishermen, day laborers, and even a completely despised tax collector named Matthew. This ragtag group, they would become the foundational messengers for his revolutionary teachings.
And revolutionary is definitely the right word for those teachings. In his famous Sermon on the Mount, Jesus radically subverts the cultural and religious norms of the ancient world. Where the old societal law demanded strict equal retaliation, an eye for an eye, the texts record him commanding his followers to actually turn the other cheek, to love their enemies. He was demanding a profound inner purity and mercy, valuing that way over outward performative religion.
So how do you communicate such heavy, paradigm-shifting concepts? Well, he used a brilliantly effective teaching style. Parables. Instead of delivering these dry academic lectures that would just go over people's heads, he used simple, everyday metaphors. Agricultural stuff, economic situations. He's talking about seeds, weeds, and debts to explain massive, profound spiritual realities to huge crowds of everyday folks, describing what he called the kingdom of heaven.
Through iconic parables like the sower, the weeds, and the mustard seed, the texts tell us he outlined a kingdom that totally flipped human expectations upside down. He taught that this kingdom starts incredibly small but grows to massive proportions, that good and evil are going to exist side by side until a final judgment, and that radical forgiveness, it's an absolute requirement. Time and time again, he elevated the poor in spirit over the proud and powerful. But the narrative asserts he wasn't just a teacher dropping wisdom. He backed up his words with action through these logic-defying miracles. To put it into perspective, the texts claim he miraculously fed a crowd of 5,000 men, and that's not even counting the women and children, using literally just 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish. Absolutely mind-boggling.
And the claims go way beyond just multiplying a packed lunch. When we look across the texts, we can categorize these astonishing miracles into 4 main buckets. The narrative illustrates his absolute dominion over the natural world by having him literally walk on water. It shows his power over sickness by instantly curing leprosy. It details his authority over demonic forces, and, most staggeringly of all, it claims he had power over death itself, like when he raised a young girl back to life.
With all these teachings and incredible miracles piling up, we hit a massive turning point in the biography at a place called Caesarea Philippi. Jesus looks at his disciples and asks them point blank, "Who do you say I am?" Peter steps right up and explicitly declares his divine identity. "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." But right on the heels of this triumphant realization, the text introduces a really dark shift. Jesus immediately starts warning them about his impending suffering and execution in Jerusalem.
And that warning? It brings us right to the climax of the story. The narrative dramatically shifts focus to what we historically call Holy Week. The texts actually slow down significantly here, detailing a dense, rapid-fire, and just incredibly tense sequence of his final days. It kicks off with massive crowds cheering his triumphal entry on Sunday, moves to him aggressively driving corrupt merchants out of the temple, and spirals quickly toward a fateful Thursday night and a deadly Friday.
As you can imagine, disrupting the status quo like that made tensions skyrocket. The religious leaders were terrified of losing their authority and provoking the wrath of the Romans, so they actively plotted to silence him. But the real tragic twist? The betrayal came from the inside. One of his very own 12 disciples, Judas Iscariot, agreed to hand him over to the authorities. And the price for this betrayal? A mere 30 pieces of silver.
Step by step, the text describes the immense, crushing emotional weight of his final night of freedom. He gathers his closest friends for one last meal, the Last Supper, establishing a new covenant by sharing bread and wine as symbols of his body and blood. He even accurately predicts that Peter will deny knowing him 3 times. Then, retreating to the Garden of Gethsemane, he prays in agonizing sorrow. And suddenly, the silence of the night is shattered by temple guards, led right to him by a kiss from Judas.
Following the arrest, the texts outlined a completely chaotic, illegal, midnight trial before the high priest, Caiaphas. They bring forward false witnesses, but ultimately, Jesus is condemned by his own words. When Caiaphas puts him under oath and asks if he is the Son of God, he affirms it. Caiaphas rips his clothes, declares it blasphemy, and the council unanimously condemns him to death.
Now, because the religious council didn't actually have the authority to execute anyone, the sources recount them transferring him to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. Pilate interrogates him, but honestly finds no legal basis for an execution. He even tries to wash his hands of the whole verdict, offering to release Jesus as a holiday custom. But the furious crowd, heavily stirred up by the religious leaders, demands the release of a violent rebel named Barabbas instead, and they just keep shouting for Jesus to be crucified.
The texts are absolutely unflinching in describing what happens next. Before the execution, Jesus endures brutal physical torture and extreme public humiliation at the hands of Roman soldiers. He is severely flogged. They dress him in a mocking scarlet robe, violently drive a crown of woven thorns into his scalp, and then force him to carry his own heavy wooden crossbeam through the city streets to the execution site, Golgotha.
And here we arrive at the absolute climax of the biography, the cross. The narrative details a grueling 6 hours of crucifixion. As darkness supposedly covers the land right in the middle of the day, the text records his agonizing final words. He cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" before finally giving up his spirit. And according to the ancient texts, at that exact moment, the earth violently shook, and the massive, heavy curtain inside the temple tore squarely in two.
With his death confirmed, the narrative reports that a wealthy disciple named Joseph of Arimathea bravely stepped up and asked Pilate for the body. He wrapped Jesus in linen and placed him in a brand new, rock-hewn tomb. But get this, the religious leaders were still incredibly nervous. Remembering Jesus' bold predictions that he would rise after 3 days, they demanded Pilate send heavily armed Roman guards to secure the site. They even sealed the massive stone door to prevent any grave robbing.
Now, if the text stopped right there, it would just be a tragic story of a martyred teacher, right? But it doesn't end there. At dawn on the 3rd day, Sunday, the text describes an explosive sequence of events. A violent earthquake strikes as an angel descends from heaven. It says the hardened Roman guards were so terrified they were paralyzed with fear, and the angel effortlessly rolls the massive stone away. When Mary Magdalene and the other women arrive to tend to the body, they step inside only to find the tomb completely empty. And this right here is the cornerstone claim of the entire narrative. The angel speaks to the terrified women and delivers the ultimate plot twist. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. This single miraculous claim completely shifts the ending of the biography. It goes from a tragic, humiliating defeat at the hands of a massive empire into a victorious, reality-bending resurrection that conquers death itself.
The final recorded event in the source material happens on a mountain in Galilee. Jesus, now resurrected, appears to his remaining 11 disciples. And he doesn't tell them to lay low or hide. Instead, he gives them what is known as the Great Commission. He commands this small, completely ordinary group of men to go out and spread his teachings, his story, and his radical way of life to the very ends of the earth, promising that he would be with them always.
And that brings us to the end of the chronological narrative. So we really have to ask ourselves, if this single ancient text and the life it describes quite literally split human history in two, how does its revolutionary narrative challenge our own understanding of love, of power, and of sacrifice today? It's a story that asks us to look at the world completely upside down. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.